Welcome to another Kingdoms of Men Army Review, Chapter 2, Cavalry, Chariots, War Machines, Titans, and Monsters. Can we talk about my favorite part of the Army, at least as far as versatility, and that's the cavalry?
I thought you were going to say the Giants.
Well, the Giant is my other favorite part of the Army because you've convinced me of that over the last few months. But the choices that we have for cavalry now in the Kingdoms of Men, every one of them is useful. I mean, they all have a different role, but every one of them is useful. And why don't you talk a little bit about the cavalry and about what you see as the advantage of them?
Well, each unit's a little different, but the Knights, what's good about the Knights is pretty obvious. That if you crunch the numbers, there's nothing in the list really that can do as much damage per point as these guys if they're getting the charge off and they're getting thunderous charge. They're really devastating. I think you can expect to get close to 10 points of damage on a unit, maybe 9, with a frontal charge from a regiment of Knights. They're your and my sort of favorite supporting unit. There's a way we use them. I think this is not. I don't like to run them forward. I like to kind of hold them back where they're kind of counter charging. We can get into that later or maybe in the next episode, but they're great. The only issue is that it's hard to move around a lot with them. I mean, the movement 8's fine, but they're not nimble, and I wouldn't recommend spending 40 points for the wine.
No.
On them either. I have to say with the Knights, Randy, I haven't messed around with the troops. I think we've talked about this before. The regiments are so close in price to the troop, and it's so much easier to pivot a sort of a square unit. I haven't been daring enough to see if the troops could be like a really cost-efficient supporting unit or not.
Well,
and
I mean,
I've had the
I think
sort of opposite with the Horde. I've been hesitant to go all in. I've run 2 regiments together to double charge stuff quite a bit, but it's sort of all the eggs in one basket issue. One little pip and they lose thunderous charge. So I haven't been really daring with different unit sizes, but I've used the regiment a ton, and I think it's points very, very wisely spent to have 1 or 3 of those.
Yeah, I've used the Horde a couple of times. The biggest problem is it's almost the same as the Horde of ranged infantry. All it takes is one chaff unit and you're screwed. Just the unit's so wide that one little unit of geckos or a freaking Ratkin regiment or something like that, heck, even somebody that's just throwing a hero out there as a speed bump, can disrupt this very, very expensive unit. And but when it hits, man, it hits a ton. I mean, but I really think that it works almost as a mobile infantry unit, as much more so than a knight unit in some ways, because like you said, it's so easy to lose crushing. You almost have to have a Bane Chanter with them in case they get stuck. With Phalanx being so strong now, putting all the eggs in one basket with a Horde, I'm not really thinking that that's a good idea anymore. What do you think?
I mean, we are talking about 32 attacks that hit on 3.
That's right.
I mean, I don't care if you get thunderous or not. You're going to do a world of hurt to somebody. It's just that you're almost doubling that if you do get the thunderous charge. So I think I'm with you. I think you have to think very hard about how you support that unit. Definitely you want Bane Chant up your sleeve to get some of that crushing back if you lose thunderous. I definitely think you want to think about Potion of the Caterpillar so that you're such a big unit. You don't want to be going through the woods all the time and getting -1 to hit. I think that if you were going to run in that way, they'd be effective. My only question would be, and this is the last thing you said there, is you're spending so many points on them. Does that make sense in the context of your army? Where you have all these, I don't know, for argument's sake, let's say you got a bunch of infantry hordes that are 150 to 200 points. And then this guy is like 400 points with his supporting stuff. Isn't that just, they're just going to shoot the heck out of your knights or whatever? Yeah, I mean, you're giving the enemy some options to fight you where he wants to or avoid you where he doesn't.
Right.
And kind of manipulate your army construction because there's not a lot of redundancy. So I'd almost say if you're going to do it, just do like 2 or 3 hordes of knights and have that be your thing. But if you're going to do that, why are you playing Kingdoms of Men? Right. There are other armies that don't have to worry about, they come with crushing and thunderous, and stuff like that. I mean, every time I try to answer the question of how to use the horde, I come up with, this is the wrong army to do it.
I got a question for you though. Now that I've really thought about the Night Horde, losing crushing, like you said, is the most horrible thing. What about, does Indomitable Will really do anything? Would that help the Night Horde, or they're probably not going to get wavered very much, so it's probably not that big a deal anyway.
I was going to mention that earlier. I think they get the least bang for the buck out of it because they have Headstrong.
Right.
And that's kind of my favorite thing about Indomitable Will. I think they're still paying 10 points for it. If Knights could pay 5 for it, kind of reflecting the fact that they're sort of, fearless already.
Right.
Then I would say go for it. I'm not going to pay 10 points for that on a unit of Knights because they're going to be in range of one of my standard bearers or something. I'm just not going to do that where I just give them the 10 points and leave them on their own. They're too important.
Right.
So I wouldn't take that.
So the other 2 cavalry choices, the mounted sergeants, I've experimented with those. The one thing that you really learn about mounted sergeants is they are not knights, not in the least bit. I mean, they have a role, but I mean, you cannot reliably, even chaff, you have to think about it before you charge head on into something, because of they're hitting on 4s and their some of their other liabilities, and their armor is not so high and everything else, but their speed is just amazing. I mean, the fact that you can get a flank charge on somebody who never thought about it, and the fact that they're nimble lets you do some cheeky things there. I know it's a little bit of theory hammer on your part, but what do you think about the mounted sergeants?
Well, I've always thought they were interesting, and I always thought that what mattered was nimble and the movement 9. I haven't used them, so this is theory hammer. But I have kind of crunched the numbers, and what you're getting out of them is basically the damage of that knightly troop for 25 more points, but with the extra movement options. So is that useful? Yes. Would I want an army full of a unit like that? Well, no. I mean, you're just not getting enough bang for your buck. This is sort of a finesse unit that you might want to play with 1 or 2 of to see if you can get in a flank charge or get in the guy's camp. That's the way I see them. I know people have used the troops of sergeants in the past sort of like fast-moving chaff, and I do see the value of that. My only problem with that is I'm never sure that's better than a hero on a Pegasus as fast-moving chaff. So I have kind of mixed feelings about it. I'm really interested in exploring them. I've got a couple of units of Kislev Winged Lancers, as you know, that I'm in the middle of painting up because I want to get them on the field and see how they do. I have faith that the Mounted Sergeants Regiment is a good buy, but I just don't know how good.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the last game I played, they were instrumental in helping me destroy 3 units. So you really can't.
Well,
I mean,
good,
but none of them were knockdown drag out things. They were always supporting something else. They could not do that by themselves. In other words, you see what I mean? That they were with something else. I mean, they charged with the giant, or they charged with the general on the winged beast. But the fact that they add those extra swings in there, and a flank charge from those suckers, 28 attacks with crushing, and if you snuck a Banechan on them, holy crap, And with nimble, they get those flank charges as opposed to knights, which they're pretty much a straightforward bludgeon compared to these things. So, Sean, is there anything else you want to say about sergeants?
Just this. We kind of went round and round about this, but at the end of the day, I've always been interested in the potential for something a little cheaper than knights as this cavalry far-reaching support unit. And we talked about the knight troop. I think anytime you're thinking about taking a knight troop or trying to shave a few points off of that knight regiment, you really got to look at the sergeant's regiment instead. Turning with a more square base is easier. The increased mobility makes them superior in a lot of ways to a supporting unit. And most importantly, they do about the same damage as that Knight troop. Again, as we've talked, they don't hit as hard as a Knight's regiment. But if you're looking for something lighter, I really think those are your guys. And so it's very hard for me to ever think about a Knight troop and not immediately go to the sergeants if I can't afford the regiment. That was my last thought.
So what is the difference between them as far as nerve? It looks like that the Knight's troop is a little bit higher in nerve. I know it's not either.
Well,
not compared to the regiment. So
I think a Knight's troop and a sergeant's regiment are pretty similar. The number is higher for the regiment, but the armor is lower. So in reality, it's going to take about the same number of hits.
Right. I see that.
Sense.
I see that. I finally put my glasses on. I apologize, so I could see what the sheet said.
I mean, with all this stuff, it's going to vary between what you're fighting, but I think they're about the same. The regiment probably comes out a little bit ahead.
It does, just slightly. But again, like you were saying, that it could take a little less hits too because its armor is not as high. So probably balances out in the long run. So the last cavalry unit we need to talk about are the mounted scouts. And I used to use mounted scouts, I would say pistoliers and outriders in my old Empire army. How do those compare to mounted scouts in Kings of War?
Well, if you're talking about like 4th, 5th edition outriders versus Kings of War scouts, I mean, it's night and day. The outriders, because used to be you could re-roll, you get another shot if you hit on a 6, and you could. It wasn't that you'd usually get that many shots, but you could end up with infinity, range damage back in the old Hammer days. And even in 6th, 7th, 8th edition Warhammer, the pistoliers were pretty good at charging people from the flank because they were getting, piercing damage and stuff like that. The bottom line is our experience with Kings of War has been that the scouts are just awful as a melee support unit. They can get in the flank, but they can't do anything with it. I think they finally fixed that in 3rd edition. Upping their melee score from 5+ to 4+ makes a world of difference. They're not a great melee unit by any measure, but I think as we've seen time and time again, 4-up can do something. You can Bane chant them. You can get real gas out of hitting a flank or a rear. In 5-up, it almost just doesn't matter. You can't do anything to make the unit good. And so the scouts having this secondary role as a flank threatener, to me, takes them from a very marginal unit that you could only really hold in reserve or use as a harassing unit, something that can be a real game changer. What do you think?
I think so too. I really like the idea of, and we've discussed it a number of times, of the scouts not being a primary unit that you run out the table very early in the game for. They're simply just too vulnerable, to shooting and magic and things like that. But if you can hold them back, they're money in the bank at the end of the game, because units are weakened. Any kind of test that you make somebody take it's all good. I mean, there's just like I said, it's just the ability to hold them back. And now with the flank charge thing, I mean, they're actually credible threats. I mean, I used one to attack a dragon in the last game I played with a flank charge with Bane Chant on it, and I did a significant amount of damage. And in the old system, I wouldn't even have hit, more than likely.
Yeah.
I mean, they were so much better. I'm not saying they're crushing in melee or melee or whatever you want to say, but on the other hand, they're competent now. They're not just garbage. And I know a couple of times that we played before, or you played, that you would charge something in the flank, and they just literally did nothing. So now you can't turn your flank to them. And the other thing I like about them is the nimble and the ability to dance around and shoot, to move forward early in the game, you take a shot. Then when you start to get threatened, you just nimble away in another direction, get behind the woods, get behind the building, do something else to get out of the way. So they're very versatile. I mean, they just have the short bows are nice against normal, I call normal armies, but
Mhm.
I like the black powder weapons. I play against Northern Alliance and salamanders way more than I can tolerate, and I'm afraid that the uh, bow version would not be worthwhile, except as a flanker type unit. Whereas now, if you get those units down, there's a pretty good chance you're going to cause that wound that you need to make that unit make a nerve check. Am I right or wrong?
No, I think I agree. There are a couple things that you touched on that I want to follow up on. One, we've kind of talked to death already, which is, now they threaten blanks. They can do something before they could do nothing, and it sounds silly, but I really think it's true. It sounds a little extreme, but 4-up makes a huge difference. You're talking about holding a unit in reserve to try and basically force nerve checks near the end of the game. That's problematic in this game for a lot of reasons, because a unit that's held back isn't contributing to the fight on the front lines, in theory. The scouts, though, they're all mounted, and they've got long enough of a range that they can fire shots into the battle, so to speak, even if they're being held back and they're literally behind your front line. And so I really feel like you wouldn't necessarily want to go all in on these guys, but they're a unit that can contribute the whole game. And what they add is something that's meaningful and different from what other units add. Then the amount of damage per point, if you're a guy who runs stuff in Excel like I do, it's not great. But the thing is that they're going to be able to do 1 damage or more the entire game to whoever they want, whether you started out on their front arm. And that's a really big deal, especially in the last few turns when everybody's battered up. If my hordes fight your hordes and yours break through, well, your hordes, if they're not maxed out on nerve, they can still shred anything they hit, unless I pop them for 1 nerve. And suddenly they run. It's a really big deal. But doing that 1 point of damage is key. And when I run the numbers on these guys, what I find is that the troops, whether it's bows or black powder, they're risking the damage output is small enough that they're risking doing no damage at all. They could fire at a unit and do nothing. The regiments are a little better. They've got more shots, so they're likely to do at least 1 damage. And to me, that's what matters. I don't need it to do 2 damage, but I want to be really sure that they're going to do 1, because 1 is enough to force a nerve check. And I think these guys really excel in that role. We're calling it like a reserve role or something, but it's really where they shine is the mop-up phase of the game, turns 5 and 6, where you're attacking wounded units. And I really feel like you need to get the regiments to get there. Now, when I run the numbers, I'm seeing that the troops can't necessarily reliably do that 1 wound, especially against defense 5. Obviously, the black powder is a little better than the bows. I feel like the regiment of bows should most of the time be able to get a wound against anybody. And I kind of don't want to buy the black powder upgrade, because with the 14 shots and 14 attacks, and that being the first tier, if you will, of investment, where you're getting the extra unit strength and the more of a square footprint, I really like the bow regiment, but I don't think you're wasting the black powder if you want to be sure, so to speak, and really, really make sure you're going to get a wound on defense 5. To me, though, the bows regiment is a sweet spot. That's more theory, though. I mean, you've run these guys on the table more than I have. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, I think that the guys with the black powder, one of the things that they do is they provoke your enemy into attacking maybe before they want to. And I've read this, played this game and played games long enough that even the tiniest bit of shooting sometimes just drives people out of their gourd. And so they just go all out to get rid of this little bit of shooting, at the expense of losing some of their main units. They're not really paying attention because they're annoyed because they're being shot. And like you said, the thing is these units can dance. They can run up to their 18-inch range, shoot in 1 turn. If they look like they're going to get charged, then they move somewhere else. So they are super annoying. And to me, they're totally superior than trying to use any kind of stationary shooting. I don't think there's even a question there, because they're better multi-role altogether. Now, their unit strength isn't what a horde of handgunners or something is, but they're so nimble they can run to the back of the other guy's back line, snag an objective or
Amen.
snag a loot token, and then sit there and shoot the heck out of people when they have nothing else better to do. So I guess that's
Amen.
my issue with the mounted scouts. I really like their versatility, and I'm not going to say it's a unit that you don't leave home without, but it's a darn fine unit. I mean, it's worth trying to make a slot for if you can, especially if you're playing 2,300 points. Maybe not at 2,000 points, but at 2,300 points, I definitely have room for that unit in my list.
They're definitely the unit I'm the most excited about when I look at the new stuff that rolled out for Third Ed. I don't know that I'll always take them, but I'm really looking forward to lots of games with at least one regiment.
Absolutely. Let's go on to my least favorite unit, probably in this entire list, and that's the Chariots. I used to use Chariots. I used to use a horde of Chariots, and I was, in the process of converting some war wagons and some other wagons into Hussite war wagons, so that looked more historical than having my late Renaissance models with Assyrian chariots or Egyptian chariots, because I thought it looked retarded. But I was trying to work on Hussite war wagons, which would be closer to theme, you know what I mean, as far as would match the rest of my army. And I used to use a horde of chariots, and they were really good fire support. They were tall, they could shoot over stuff. I mean, they weren't overpowered in the least. And the nice thing is, if somebody stuck a chaff unit out there somewhere, I mean, you could take its head off because you could move 18 inches on the charge. So they were very decent. But now I think you're just paying too many points for that unit and for what it does. And that's my issue. I mean, if the points were cheaper, or if the shooting, I mean, if they didn't have to go to half on shooting, they could have went to 3/4 and they would have still been decent. But as it is now, I mean, you look at a regiment of charioteers, 155 points versus a regiment of mounted sergeant at 150. There's no way you would ever take a regiment of charioteers over a mounted sergeant, because mounted sergeants are nimble, and that alone makes them worthwhile. And the fact that you're paying 5 more points for what, 6 bow shots? Are you kidding me? I mean, that's just absurd.
Yeah, to respond to that, going back to our conversation about the scouts, I think the issue here is that at any size, the number of shots you're getting is so small that you're unlikely to force a nerf check at all. I think if you took a legion and you're shooting at a lightly armored unit, you're a little bit more likely than not to do 1 damage. In any other circumstance, you're firing these shots, you're just going to do nothing. So I don't mind paying points for versatility. We just finished talking about the scouts. I don't think you're really getting meaningful versatility with the charioteers. The 2 things I want to say, though, is that the troop is kind of interesting because it's got a narrow front. You know,
Yes,
it's 100
yes.
millimeters wide, I guess.
Yes.
And it does move 9, so it charges 18. So as something that you would use sort of like a counter chaff, like you're saying, that you can kind of rock it off there and just take off the unit. This reminds me of the armies that take like single heroes on a horse just to knock out some supporting unit or disrupt a shooter. But, you know, you're taking it as a troop instead of as a hero slot. And for 125 points, it's got to compete with the mounted scouts or sergeants troop, I think. And you got to justify why I take the charioteers instead. The thinner base would be the only real reason, because I think the shooting is negligible. But it does sort of occupy a space in between the troop and the regiment for the sergeants. So I don't know that I'll overtake them, but that's, if I were going to, it would be because I really felt I needed something to fill that ecological niche in the games I was playing. The other thing that I kind of am interested in is the Legion. I mean, the Horde it's 4 wide. I don't understand that. I don't want to understand it. It's just too big. I don't want to mess with a unit like that. But the Legion's it's 3 chariots wide, 150. If you throw something really good on it, like the Brew of Sharpness, then to me it feels a little bit like it's halfway in between a regiment of knights and a horde of knights, while being a little more narrow in the frontage. And obviously it's much more frail than like a horde of knights or whatever. But I do think that it offers something that's worth thinking about. But the regiment and the horde just aren't all that interesting to me.
All I see is 225 points, and I can have another foot guard unit.
I know.
I mean, that's what gets me is I'm thinking, okay. I mean, now that if I put brew of sharpness or something on it, now I'm up there where I can have 2 hordes of something else. I mean, I could have 2 hordes of shield wall almost for the same points. I'm messing around with these stupid chariots, and so I'm disappointed in what they did to the chariots. I think maybe if they just took the shooting totally off of them and just reduced the points, that I would think about using them more. Does that make sense? Because
Sure.
I don't think that the shooting does anything for them. I mean, if you're not, if you're not charging with that movement of 18, then I don't want to sit there and shoot, and expect a troop 4 bow shots. I mean, that does nothing. I mean, it's a joke.
Yeah.
So that to me is why the chariots are my least favorite unit in the whole list, and they might be able to improve them if they would. Like I said, if they would go back up to a little bit more shooting level on, like a horde going or legion going to 15 shots, and a horde up to 10 or something like that. Then they become they're at that point. But I understand why they did it. I've been on the receiving end of 5 hordes of chariots and 80-something bow shots a turn. I know why they did it, and it absolutely makes sense.
I just wish they'd handled it differently. You have units that only do one thing, I think, are easy for a game designer to come up with the points for. Units that do multiple things, it's more complicated. Now, the scouts are interesting because the 2 things they do are the nimbleness and the melee ability, not great, and the shooting all kind of work together. You feel like you're going to make use of all these abilities just on different turns of the game. So I think they're a really good example of a multi-purpose unit that's effective. The charioteers feel more like a modal unit. You're either going to use them as shooters or you're going to use them to charge, and you don't know what you're going to do until you get there. With the shooting as watered down as it is, I feel like the shooting mode has no value or close to no value.
All right, the next thing that I'm going to bring up to talk about are the war engines. And we have 3 selections in the list: the siege artillery, the ballista, and the cannon. To me, there's really basically 2 that I want. That's the ballista and the cannon. The siege artillery is kind of, I don't know about it. I think that it does save a couple of points by not having to pay, I guess, for the short range thing. But why don't you discuss them with me? Because I know you've done the rules, the math hammer on all of these things, and you came to a determination of which one is probably the most efficient.
Well, I'm with you. I kind of think 2 of them are more efficient, and I'll get to why in a minute. This shooting is a part of the game where I do think it's always worth running the math. Pull out your Excel, make a complicated formula. The siege artillery, I'll go ahead and lead with this. It's probably the most efficient points per damage artillery piece out of the 3 in most cases. But I don't want to go into too much detail because it's only barely more efficient. And that 12-inch blind spot to me is not worth it. I know there'll be lots of games or ways that I could set it up where that doesn't matter. For those of you that think siege artillery looks cool, or you just love the idea of the efficiency, go for it. It's not a bad choice, but it's not going to be on my tabletop because I'm giving up potentially way too much. I mean, 12 inches could be half the freaking board that matters. I'm just not going to do that, and not for a sliver of efficiency. The cannon and the ballista are the interesting ones. The ballista was kind of the one that grabbed my attention because 4 up to hit is really interesting. And in the last edition, everything was hitting on 5s, but we all knew you're going to have a -1 from something, most of your shots, cover, stealthy, individual. And the difference between 5 up and 6 up, you're losing half of your efficiency. And 1 shot a turn, especially, it was just, you'd be lucky to hit with it once or twice a game, and this stuff was expensive. Now the ballista, I kind of knew it was going to be this way because we saw it previewed, so to speak, in the Basilean list. But hitting on 4s means that, yeah, they'll probably have cover, but you're hitting on 5. That's an acceptable, decrease in your efficiency. And for 75 points, when you run the numbers, what I'm getting is that in the open, the ballista is definitely the most efficient points per damage war engine. When you're shooting into cover, the cannon ekes it out a little bit more. That's against defense 4. Against defense 5, the cannon's extra piercing matters, and it gets ahead again, whether or not you're shooting into cover. But these are really, really marginal differences between the two, and I don't know that they're going to be statistically relevant in most games. It's just a numbers game. They're both good. The cannon adds the shattering, which is pretty interesting. But I really think that at the end of the day, it's just a question of how you want to spread your points around. Do you have exactly 225 points to spend on war machines? Well, get 3 ballistas, you'll be happy. Do you?
Right.
I do like the fact that ballistas spread your points a little thinner. And if someone wants to go after one of your war machines, they're not getting as much value out of it per attack against a war machine. So I still favor the ballistas a little. But really, Randy, I just think it's about how many points do you have to spend on war machines and what combination of cannons and ballistas are you going to get with this point.
The cannon, I noticed in the last game that I played, the shattering on the cannon made them incredibly annoying against chaff because that extra +1, I mean, if you did a couple of wounds and you got the +1 because of the shattering, next thing you know, you wavered something. And I don't know how that factors into the formula, the mathematic formula, but I found that to be a value, that the shattering, just to keep some chaff unit wavered for a turn and not able to shield the flank of a unit or prevent a charge or something like that, that it feels weird shooting a cannon at chaff when you really want to shoot it at some giganto dinosaur or something like that. But
yeah,
it's really effective against the chaff. So I think that's like I said, to me, I kind of shade toward the 2 cannons now versus the 3 ballistas. But the next game, I'll try the 3 ballistas and just see how it goes. I may totally change my mind, after getting a little bit more playing time in.
One thought on the shattering, like you said, it's weird because you think that the cannon is kind of pounding into these targets that you want to wear out. I think it's just because traditionally we know that cannons, were originally the siege weapon, or all this artillery was. But when you think about the value of shattering, that's like getting a whole extra wound for free against a unit, but only if it's a unit that's beat up enough to where you could rout it this turn. So shooting at a horde that hasn't been hurt yet, the shattering adds nothing. You're not going to roll I guess you could roll so I'm going to help you roll 12, right? So there's no way that it helps you against a fresh horde or a vampire dragon or something like that when they're to turn 1 shot or something. But yeah, anything that's about to where you're about to reach that tipping point, that's the equivalent of an extra wound for free. It's a really big deal. I think the issue is that you have to think of choosing targets differently. In Warhammer, we used to fire cannons at the biggest, beefiest thing we could see because they'd have deep ranks, we'd hit more models, and we just wanted to wear them out. In this game, I really think shooting of all kinds does best when you shoot at units that you could rout on the turn that you shoot it. And from that point of view, that the shattering is a really big deal. And so I tell everyone they should take 3 ballistas now because I think it's cool. I am going to probably keep running my 2 cannons because they look right with my Empire guys, and the shattering's real neat. So I know I kind of said stuff you said, but that's some more thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I mean, the shattering is going to it is going to have an effect at some point during the game is my thought on it. It won't happen on turn 1, but it could happen on turn 1 on an 8-10 troop of something, right? I mean, it doesn't take a couple of wounds in that. You're +3. All you need is a 5 to waver them. So
Yep.
I mean, to waver a troop in front of somebody else's big unit, in front of their chaff wavers in front of their big horde or something, you totally control the movement phase with just one shot. And I believe that,
Yep.
and that to me makes the shattering a little bit more worth it. But like I said, I'll try the 3 ballistas, and I may totally change my mind the next time I play. So uh, let's just leave it that on the war engines. I like the war engines. The siege artillery seems to be a little silly now compared to the other two choices. It seems fairly clear to me either the ballistas or the cannon are the way to go.
Agreed.
Let's talk about, we have monsters and titans, and they're kind of the same thing. So let's just combine them together. The mammoth, which I really didn't like the idea that they did a mammoth as opposed to doing a beast of war or something like that, like we had in the last edition. The mammoth is interesting in the fact that it is a chariot base as opposed to being put on those huge titan bases, and it works to me better in a middle of my infantry line, that I could slice it in between 2 units and just either charge with my horde or charge out to protect my horde from something nasty coming toward it.
Yeah.
What do you think about the mammoth?
Well, I think when you run the numbers, the performance between the giant and the mammoth is functionally identical. We talked about this before. The numbers aren't exactly the same, but with the one that has head that I don't want to go into it. They're going to do about the same damage. They've got about the same number of hits they can take. They move the same. It's just about the difference in base size. I agree that mammoth is the one, if it's all the same, that you want to be charging sandwiched between 2 units, because they're almost always going to be able to facilitate a triple charge. For example, if the other guy has a giant and you have a mammoth, and 2 infantry hordes, all 3 of them could charge it because the mammoth is thinner. But as we know, and we come back to this again and again, if you have any sort of long, skinny base or wide, skinny base, things get really hinky when you need to turn 90 degrees in a clustered up part of the battlefield. So as I used to see with my Beast of War in second ed a lot, it's not as great when you're trying to get a flank charge, or you're getting charged in the flank and turning. Can't always do what you want. I think the mammoths go in the middle of your line. The giants go more on the flanks of your line, where you're going to want to pivot on, turn on a dime with that 75 millimeter base. I will say, though, 2 things kind of disappoint me. The mammoth, getting rid of the shooting option on the Beast of War makes me a little sad, just because I think, like a lot of old Warhammer players, I've got a bunch of steam tanks and cannons and stuff on the top. I want to use them. And even if I didn't, my army is themed kind of early Renaissance. I don't know that a mammoth makes the most sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like
giant,
the chariots. It doesn't fit.
Yeah, and, the giant, fine. I can give him slash and puff, clothing or whatever. So I'm going to keep using giants in small amounts, but them I'm going to use even less too, because I really like the fact that the giant was so cheap before. The 190 points, he was an inferior giant, but the 50 millimeter base was so easy to manipulate, run around. Honestly, the second ed giant was probably too good. So I sort of want to hesitate saying this because I don't want to criticize something they did right. But I don't think the giant is as good as it used to be, because I think being able to buy them at like a discounted version of the giant for 190 points with a smaller base, I think that was superior. And what we've got to deal with now isn't quite as good, but it's still really great. And you and me have had the same experience where people think the giant's going to be this beater unit, but what it really is it's a tough unit. It's a unit you can put out on your flank. It's really hard to beat him into submission with a defense 5+, and as high a nerve as he's got. He's almost like a horde, without being quite that good. But he can charge 7. He's this really versatile ringer unit that is very hard to kill on one turn, can reach out and hit something. Doesn't get a large number of attacks, so I think it's a trap to think of him as offensive unless you're attacking units with high armor, because then he'll go right through them and you'll be happy. But that's my thoughts. I'm still using the one giant in my list. but I'm less bullish about them now than I was in second ed.
See, I look at the giant himself, and probably the mammoth. If I think about it, the mammoth to me is a better infantry support because of the way I ran my old Beast of War in the last edition. I would just, wait till somebody presented the flank or something, or I would just charge with one of my nasty hordes and the mammoth, or not in this, I mean that case the Beast of War, and it was game over. I mean, it didn't matter what unit it were, it was going down for those combined charges. The giant, this was something you convinced me of. I used to run 3 regiments of knights, and it was inevitable that one of my regiments of knights was always in my way or never got into the battle. And now I run the giant on the end of my infantry line, exactly like you said. It's as tough as a horde. It doesn't kill stuff by itself, but on the other hand, it kind of tar pits things, and that's what you want is just that something to defend your flank. So if I have one flank against the table edge for support, to keep from being flanked, and I've got the giant on the other end, I feel pretty good about my chances of my infantry line actually having an impact on the battle. Now, I have had my giant one shot at having him out there on the flank, but usually my other units get retribution over the long term and kill whatever killed the giant, because they have to put so much into doing that. That means they've left a flank open. They've left an opportunity for you to hit them back, so to speak. That's to me, that's the beauty of the giant, is in that flank protection. And I remember one battle I ran the giant and a horde of, in this case, fanatics out on the flank, and it's like, which one do you want to get hit by? You pick, because either way, it's not going to come out well for you.
Yeah.
And so that is my idea of the giant. It's firmly in my list. I would have to think. I wouldn't even know what to use if I didn't use it now. I've got so used to having that as my pivot point in my line. So like if I had the giant, my pikeman, my foot guard, and then my berserkers like in a row, I know that is going to hurt somebody. And the giant, like I said, he is such a good linchpin. And then you can put all the fast stuff or your heavy hitting stuff to the other side of him. And he still forms that nice pin, to swing like a door into the enemy. So I don't know what I would replace him with. I might go back to that unit of cavalry or something like that. But I really can't think of any better unit to anchor the end of your infantry line. I guess that's all I got to say.
Yeah, he really does something that you want in every game. It's very hard to see how you could, nothing else replaces him. Again, other than a mammoth, which is kind of a functional equivalent with it in the base size. I don't think I'll ever stop taking a giant, or I should say, at least I would never recommend anyone, some newcomer, they say, what do? I'd say, buy a giant and then figure out the rest, because I really do think that they're unique in terms of this list.
And what do you think about folks that run multiple giants, run cheap infantry, and say 2 or 3 of the suckers?
Well, you're sure getting taxed for it in third ed.
Yes, you are.
I played against a list like that once that wasn't, in retrospect, it wasn't strictly legal, but it was tough. But to get back to what I was saying earlier, I think that there's a trap you can fall in thinking, well, this is a big giant. He can kill a bunch of stuff. And it's not really true. If you have 3 giants on, the old 20 millimeter bases, they could do wreak a lot of havoc,
right.
Triple charging something, but that's not an option anymore. So I'm not, if I saw somebody plop down 3 giants in front of me, I wouldn't really necessarily be intimidated by it. I know it would present a unique type of challenge, and I wouldn't just do the same old against a list like that. But with them costing a little more, bigger bases, you'd have to run some really cheap stuff, because I don't know how you'd get. You run 3 giants, but you certainly couldn't run 3 giants and 3 mammoths unless
you had 6 hordes or something.
6 regiments of shield wall and no characters.
Yeah. The thing about giants, just to me, is if that giant is just fighting a regular old horde, it doesn't matter what the horde is. It's wrong. The giant will struggle in that role. He's hitting on 4s most of the time. and
He's going to lose. Yeah.
he's going to lose over time. I mean, even the lowly shield wall with the measured force on it will take down a giant in 3 rounds.
Sure.
Maybe 2.
Bane chant your boys.
2 if he gets
Yeah,
lucky.
they're going to win.
I mean, they don't need the bane chant. They wound on force regardless. So they don't even need the upgrade. So, I mean, like I said, a lowly horde like that can, heck, even a horde of polearms would do the same damn thing. So,
and those are cheaper than the giant. I mean, so this is a unit you want to use right,
significant,
or you'll waste your points.
And that's what I see sometimes is players want to. I mean, if the giant charges in with your unit of knights, or with that same with your unit of polearms or whatever, it absolutely is a game changer. It will go from maybe wavering them to almost 100% wavering them, just because of his power. But to charge a giant into a horde is just a waste of a giant. I mean, he's going to go down. It's just a matter of time. So,
yeah, I mean, again, in a pinch, that's a valid tactic, but it's not an efficient tactic because you're throwing away a more expensive unit to lose to a weaker unit. To a cheaper unit.
Well, I have used the giant as chaff. I know that's a 225 point thing, but on the other hand, he can hold up something for a couple of turns while you beat on the rest of the guy's army. And that was the case. The case of where I used it. So I could focus all this nasty stuff into a small frontage and win the game locally. And hopefully the giant's still there with at the end, and then I could just swing around and kill that unit as well. So it's not it's not a bad chaff unit. It's just an expensive chaff unit.
Yeah, you just don't want that to be plan A. I think it speaks to the versatility of the giant, but not to the efficiency of the giant. If he can do that, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I did try to delay 3 giants with a giant once, and I'll tell you that was not effective.
No, it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be. I mean, in that case, like I said, just a regular old horde, or heck, even a regiment of some things. I mean, a giant having to deal with a regiment of foot guards, with great weapons. It's going to be a tight thing who wins that one. So,
that was a one-turn deal. He was gone.
Yeah. But I have had giants one-shotted before a couple of times. Once by salamanders, once by Northern Alliance, believe it or not, with just had so many attacks that they took him down in one turn. And
those
it was shocking
heavy armies, But I think it speaks, like you were saying a minute ago, it speaks to the giant that they really got to finagle some stuff to do that. I assume that in none of those circumstances were they one-shotted with a single horde on one turn.
No, it was a horde and something else, but the horde had Bane Chant, and it wasn't easy. And in the case of the salamanders, that's before they did some nerfing to the salamanders and nerfing to shooting. The salamanders just shot him down with their dinosaur mount things and their flying gecko warriors at the time, because back then you could take all those +1 piercing things on those. Now you're taking 20 piercing shots a turn to hit on 4. Well, it doesn't take very long to take down a giant at that level. So again, I mean, it is possible to one-shot them, but in theory, you probably could one-shot a horde if you could one-shot a giant just as easy. I mean, if they could do that, they could pretty much take your horde down as well. So I do like the giant. Like I said, I'm at that point now.
More to the.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that speaks more to the table conditions, choices, and less to the unit. I'm with you. The giant is just a solid choice. And like I said, if you're a new player and you're like, man, what can I do to get started? I'd say 3 hordes and a giant.
That'd be a good place to start.
Pretty good start. Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching our series so far. The next segment is going to be on characters and their uses and how they're used to support your regiments and to seek out and destroy enemy shooters.